Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we're going to share scary Wendigo horror stories. First story, the Wendigo. Do you know of the Fort Kent Wendigo in Alberta, Canada? Most would say it is an urban legend, but after what I have read and experienced, my view has taken a 180-degree turn. It all started when myself and a group of 3 friends wanted to make a Bollywood movie about the Wendigo. After spending 2 weeks of researching the Wendigo and what they looked like, I found the Wendigo of Fort Kent. Some say that a doctor locked himself in his house with his dead wife that had just died of smallpox. Then he ate her and turned into the Wendigo. Along with his wife, many of the town's folk died from smallpox. Once the man left his home, he killed and ate the remaining dozen or so residents of the town. No one is really sure about what happened, but there is one fact no one can deny. Fort Kent became a ghost town, and no one really knows why. After finding out all of this information, I knew that we had a great idea for a movie. The only problem was the place was pretty isolated. So if we got into any trouble, it would be days before anyone would be able to help them. Luckily, Bobby's parents were filthy rich, since they were both plastic surgeons. They spoiled Bobby rotten and gave him everything he wanted. Even so, he was a pretty down-to-earth guy and one of my best friends. Along with Bobby, there was Mike and Kylie. As for myself, the producer of the soon-to-be movie, my name is Tara. So we took off in a small jet, heading from Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, to Elk Point Airport, Alberta. We took a fancy Canon 80D DSLR camera with us to shoot the movie, as well as a portable field mixer, a wireless microphone system, a shotgun microphone and boom pole, wind protection for the mics, a field recorder, and headphones. Along with all of that equipment, we brought camping equipment. When we got to Elk Point Airport, we rented a Hyundai Tucson, loaded it up with all of our equipment, and headed for Bonnyville. Now, it usually takes 45 minutes to an hour to drive to Bonnyville, but we were going in January. They had just gotten 24 cms of snow, and the roads were heavy with snow. It took us 3 hours to get to Bonnyville, where we got groceries and lots of alcohol for our month's stay in the ghost town of Fort Kent. For a bit of background, the 4 of us have been friends since elementary and just graduated high school. We decided to take a year off before heading to college and came up with the bright idea of making a horror movie. Bobby's parents had given Bobby the sound equipment and camera as a graduation present. We spent the summer figuring out what we were going to film when we came across the urban legend of the Wendigo of Fort Kent. Since then, we have been obsessed about the film. After we had gotten the essentials needed for our trip to the ghost town, we headed for the fort. January 12, 2018, Day 1. We arrived in Fort Kent around 2 p.m. It took us 4 hours to set up all the tents and gear. We decided to set up near the outskirts of town. For some reason, we felt more comfortable here. No one said anything, but everyone got more nervous the further we went into town. By the time we were all set up, the sun had already set, and we couldn't see anything past the glow of the bonfire. We decided to drink the night away, talking about all the things we would do once the morning came. Around 10 p.m., we started to notice snowflakes starting to fall. We huddled around the fire more, but when the wind started picking up as well, we decided to call it a night. We had 2 tents set up, one for me and Mike and the other one for Kylie and Bobby. Mike and I lay on top of a blow-up queen-size mattress that had 3 heavy covers on top of it. The 2 of us got under the blankets and looked up at the ceiling. I could feel Mike trying to get into my pants, but I shrugged him off. This place was giving me a bad vibe, and I wasn't in the mood. The walls of the 8-person tent shook as the wind and snow pummeled against the tent, making it difficult to hear anything. At the time, I didn't think anything of it, but I swore I thought I could hear the howl of a wolf through the sound of the wind. January 13th, 2018, Day 2. I woke up around 6 a.m. this morning to Mike snoring beside me. His arm was draped around me as my eyes slowly opened. The tent was still, and the sound of the wind was silent. I brought my hand up to his arm and pulled it off of me. I I rolled off the bed and pulled myself off of the floor. I quickly got dressed. To my surprise, it was warmer inside than I thought it would have been. I put on a parka and toque and opened the flap that led outside. A foot of snow fell into the tent the moment the flap was open. I let out a startled, silent meep and jumped back. I looked behind me, wondering if I had awoken Mike. To my relief, he was still snoring away. I composed myself and pulled myself out of the tent and into the snow. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked outside. I stood at 5'8" and had the snow reach up to my knees, so overnight we had gotten a fair amount of snow. So it took me by complete surprise when I saw a set of footprints traveling through the snow around our tents. I figured that Bobby must have gotten up during the night and had a smoke. So again, I didn't think much of it. I looked towards the town. 2 run-down houses stood about 100 feet away. Then I looked to my right and saw our rental vehicle completely covered in snow. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning off the vehicle of snow. By the time I had finally gotten it cleaned, the rest of my friends had gotten up and started walking around. Bobby had taken out his camera and started to film the area. The last I had seen him, he was heading into town with Kylie while Mike came over to me. We talked a while about the project we were working on. We didn't have any shovels, so getting the SUV out of the area we were in was very difficult. Eventually, after much effort, we got the SUV out and onto the soft snow. The 4-wheel drive made the situation a little better. We both got into the SUV and drove it through the town. We followed the footprints that seemed to go to each house in the town, until finally the footprints went to a house, and there weren't any footprints coming back out. We parked the SUV on the side of the road, got out, and headed to the house the footprints went to. Turns out the house had looked like someone had been living in it recently. We found them in the basement. Bobby was filming writing, which was covering every square inch of the basement. On one side of the wall it read, "Beware the Wendigo." As the writing went along the wall, the writing got more and more messy. By the end, the writing became scratches in the wall. Finally, it read, "I am the Wendigo." We did some more shooting, making an introduction to the movie. By the time 4 p.m. came around, we decided to head back to the campground and pack it in for the night. By the time we got back to camp, it was pitch black outside. We parked the SUV beside the tents, and all 4 of us headed inside mine and Mike's tent. We continued to drink and had a cold dinner from soup cans. We played cards until 10 p.m., right until we heard a howl coming right outside of our tent. We had been talking pretty loudly, so we hadn't heard it approach. We could hear the sound of crunching snow under heavy footprints. Then its shadow cast itself on the tent, and the only thing we could see were its legs. Not only was the creature bipedal, but it was huge. Mike was about to open the flap to check what it was when we heard the sound of metal being torn to pieces. The sound of the car alarm going off as it did. I wanted to scream, but I was too terrified to do so. Soon the sound of metal being torn to shreds stopped, and silence ensued. I was about to let out a sigh of relief when I heard another howl. Then the sound of the other tent being torn to shreds could be heard. After another 5 minutes, the sound faded, and we could hear the creature walking away from our tents. We waited until midnight to get out of our tent and see the damage. The car and tent were destroyed. We had left most of our food in the car, and from what we could see, there was no food left. Kylie started to cry, and Bobby tried to console her, while Mike and I just stood there in shock, wondering what we would do next. Bobby had brought his camera into our tent, but the sound equipment he had been in his tent and was now destroyed as well. We realized that our project was finished, and we would have to go back to Bonneville in the morning. We didn't get much sleep that night, and this was only the tip of the iceberg. Our stay in Fort Kent was only just starting. Mike left today to go and get help early this morning. The only thing he brought with him was a bottle of water and a few supplies. On a good day, it would take just over 2 hours to walk from Fort Kent to Bonneville. But judging by the thickness of the snow he has to trudge through, It could take a lot longer. We may not be rescued until much later. January 14th, 2018. Day 3:06 p.m. Mike is still not back from Bonneville. We heard a howl far in the distance around 10 a.m. in the direction of where Mike was headed. We hoped that whatever had destroyed our tent and SUV didn't get Mike too. We are still holding out hope that Mike had made it to Bonneville, and the rescue team is just having a difficult time getting here due to the heavy snowfall. Meanwhile, boneheaded Bobby decided to go back into town this morning with his camera. Kylie didn't follow him this time. She was crying too hard to even think about leaving camp. The sun set 2 hours ago, and he is still not back yet. I'm getting very nervous right now. The tent feels colder than ever right now without Mike. I miss him a lot and wish that he would get back soon. January 15, 2018. Day 4:01 a.m. Mike and Bobby never came back yesterday. Kylie and I are curled up together under 3 layers of blankets. Kylie finally managed to fall asleep around 10 p.m. last night after crying all day. The reason why I am writing in my journal now is because I thought I heard howling again. Once I was awake, I heard something else. It was screaming. It was coming from the town, so it must be Bobby. Oh God, why did we come to Fort Kent? The screaming has gone on for the past hour and hasn't stopped. Kylie is still somehow sleeping though all of this. I don't know how it is possible. January 15th, 2018. Day 4:03 a.m. I don't know if I should be happy or sad, but the screaming from the town has ceased. I hope that Bobby had gotten away, but chances are that whatever was making him scream finally killed him. January 15, 2018. Day 4:06 and 35 seconds a.m. I just saw someone walking back from the town. I thought it was Bobby at first. He had managed to get away from the beast. But as the man got closer to where we were, I stood there dumbfounded. It was Mike. How the hell did he come back in the opposite direction from the city? Mike noticed me as well and started to run as fast as he could through the knee-high snow. He told me everything that had happened to him since he left the camp 24 hours ago. He said that he had been walking all day yesterday, going non-stop. He only stopped to take brief sips of water. He told me that around 10 a.m. he heard the howl as well. It had been really close to him, and it freaked him out. Luckily, there had been a cluster of trees near the area he was at and dived behind the nearest tree. He heard the beast walking down the road that he had coming on and dared to take a peek from out behind the tree he was currently hiding behind. Now he was about 20 feet away from the road, and the tree he was hiding behind was about 30 feet tall. So when he tells me that the creature he saw was as tall as the tree he was hiding behind, it gave me an idea of how monstrous this beast really was. Even though the thing was really tall, it was lanky and bent over. It had a snout-like face and antlers coming out the top of the head. Its arms and legs had no skin and no muscle. You could see its bony arms and legs. It had fur covering its shoulders and sharp, elongated teeth. When the monster was right in front of him, it turned around and stared in Mike's direction. Mike hid back behind the tree, hoping to God the thing didn't see him. The thing became deathly silent. It didn't make a sound for half an hour. He lay his back against the tree the entire time. He felt like the thing was playing with him. It knew he was there, but for some reason didn't come after him. He said that when the thing finally started to stomp his way down the road again, he felt really sleepy. By the time he woke up, it was dark and he really needed to get to Bonneville. So he continued down the road. The cold was really starting to get to him, and he needed shelter sooner rather than later. That was when he saw a building in the distance. It took 20 minutes to finally trudge up to the place. Luckily, the door was unlocked, and no one was inside. There was no heat and no bed, so he went to the warmest and most intact room in the house and slept. When 1 a.m. rolled around, he heard the howling and screaming nearby. It was strange because he swore that it was Bobby whose voice he heard. That was impossible since he had to be a couple of miles away from Fort Kent by now. He didn't sleep after that And at 3 a.m., when the screaming stopped, he headed back out again. When he started down the road again, he thought he reached another deserted town. As he walked, he realized in dismay that this was not a new town, but Fort Kent. He swore that it was impossible that he was back in the town. If he had gotten turned around, he would have seen Tara first, not the other side of the town. January 15th, 2018. Day, 4:10 a.m. We took stock of what little resources we had left. We had 10 water bottles. We used to have 12, but Mike had 2. He seemed really dehydrated when he returned. We had 3 granola bars and 2 bags of chips, but from what we had, it wouldn't sustain the 4 of us for very long. Well, there was still only 3 of us at this point. The next step we had to take was find what happened to Bobby. From the screaming we had heard from the night before, it was possible that the monster had gotten Bobby and killed him, or eaten him. Kylie and Mike and I took a bottle of water each and 1 granola bar. Kylie seemed to be doing a lot better than yesterday. She stopped crying sometime late last night and has been strong ever since. By the time we entered the town, it was 11 a.m. Kylie told us about the houses she and Bobby had gone into the second day we had gotten here. More than likely, Bobby wouldn't have gone into the houses he already went in. So we started at the house we had ended at the last time. We walked through the entire town, going house to house. We ended up not finding anything. We followed a set of footprints to a house. When we got there, we searched the house from head to toe, but couldn't figure out what the footprints led to. Defeated, we headed back to camp an hour before sunset. We stopped in our tracks as soon as the camp came into view. The second tent that was still intact before was now shredded to pieces as well. We were now left in the middle of a ghost town with no food and little water. If that wasn't bad enough, we were trapped in this town with a monster. We didn't know what to do. We had nothing but ourselves left. Last night was really difficult for the 3 of us. We walked to one of the houses that were just in view of what used to be our tents. The house was pretty dilapidated, and the 3 of us ended up huddled together in a closet. There were some dusty and dirty old clothes in the closet that we draped over our bodies to try and keep warm. I looked down at my phone. It was dead now, as useless to me now as it had been when it was still working. There was no reception out here. We had even tried to call 911. All we got in response was, "Phone operator, we are sorry, but the number you are trying to reach is not in service. Please hang up and try your call again." We tried many times to get through to anyone, but the same message kept coming back to us. Last night, in a fit of rage, I took my phone and hurled it down the road away from the town. We were trapped in this ghost town with no food. Luckily, we had snow all around us, so we could melt the snow and drink the water it gave us. Last night was the worst night we had since we arrived. We knew that it was snowing. It was the last thing we saw before entering the closet we now occupied. Besides that, there was no other sound to be heard. It was deathly, quite like we were the only inhabitants left in this world. There was no screaming, there was no beastly howl, just pure and utter silence. The type where you could hear your heart beating. Neither Mike or I slept at all last night until 6 a.m. Kylie, on the other end, had cried herself to sleep around 9 p.m. last night. When we finally awoke, there was snow on our side of the closet. Mike was already awake, while I heard snoring coming from beside him. I pulled off the dirty clothes that had been covering me and pushed the closet door open. Wisps of snow blew into the closet. The entire top floor had a thin layer of snow covering the ground. I got up and walked to the front of the house, where the wall was completely missing. It looked as if another 20 cms of snow had fallen overnight. All the footprints we had created over the last 5 days were now gone. From what I could see, it would be very difficult to move around the neighborhood now. I heard the crunch of footsteps coming from behind me. I was so paranoid at that point I spun around expecting to see a monster. I let out an audible sigh when I saw it was only Mike. He walked up beside me and wrapped his arms around me and stared outside along with me. January 16, 2018. Day, 5:12 p.m. After scrounging around the house for any supplies, we checked our knapsacks and took stock of the supplies we had. We had no food left by this point. Our water situation wasn't much better considering it was too cold for the snow to melt in our water bottles. So we resorted to putting snow in our mouth and eating it. We were getting weak by this point at the lack of food. The last thing any of us ate was the granola bar we had yesterday. So when Kylie finally came out of the closet, we headed outside and into the deep snow. We walked past an open field. Across the street was a church. We had gone through all the houses in the town and had yet to check out the church. So we walked up the front doors of the church and pushed the door. Out of all the buildings in the town, the church was the most intact. The windows were all broken, but wooden boards covered them. The door hadn't been opened in I don't know how many years, and it took all three of us to open the door. After 10 minutes, with the door squealing like a banshee from lack of use, we managed to get the door open halfway. Kylie went in first, followed by Mike. Before I went inside, I thought I heard a sound. I turned around and looked across the street. I thought I saw a shadow moving across the field, but the shadow was indistinguishable. I shook my head and followed the others into the church. I nearly bowled over Mike and Kylie as I walked through the doors. For some reason, they were just a few feet away from the threshold of the door and seemed to be transfixed by something. I pushed my way between the two of them and looked to see what they were looking at. On the altar at the back of the church sat a table. On top of the table sat a feast. There was all types of meats and potatoes and greens. Kylie ran up to the table and took handfuls of meat and started to devour what was on the table. Mike and I, on the other hand, walked up to the table. I found it extremely odd that there would be a feast of this magnitude in a ghost town. I stopped just short of the table, and so did Mike. We both knew that something was definitely off and weren't hungry enough to eat whatever sat on that table. Then I realized what was bothering me. Even though the food on the table looked freshly cooked, there wasn't the sweet aroma of cooked meat in the air. The more I thought about it, the more the meat in front of me changed. Instead of a feast, there was a bloody mess of flesh and blood. I saw blood dripping from the crucifix that Jesus hung on, and my eyes slowly rose, until my eyes finally rested upon where Jesus' face would be. Only it wasn't Jesus. It was Bobby. I fell to my knees and yelled for Kylie to stop. I told her that she was eating Bobby. She turned around and looked at me confused. All I could do was point at the head of Bobby, which now sat atop of Jesus' head. This seemed to break her out of her trance. She looked down at her hands and body and let out a shrill scream as she realized that she was covered in blood and gore. Mike ran over to her and lifted her up. I walked over to her as well. Mike and I carried Kylie to the entrance of the church. We both looked at each other, giving each other a knowing glance over Kylie's head. After that, we walked back to the house we had camped in the night before and went into the basement of the house. The three of us just sat there. January 21st, 2018, day 10:08 a.m. We have camped in the basement of that house since day 5. Nothing really had been going on for the last couple of days. Mike and I had gone searching for food. This town has been picked clean, however. We resorted to going into the woods near the town. We found nothing, and the hunger pains are starting to really get to myself and Mike. Kylie, on the other hand, is the one we are really concerned about. If the story of the Wendigo is true, then Kylie has committed cannibalism, and she will become a Wendigo herself. We were hopeful at first, but she started getting aggressive after that first night. We tied her up in the basement of the house across the street while Mike and I stayed in the basement of the house, which had become our new campground. We still haven't heard or seen the giant Wendigo since Mike saw it on the 4th day we had been here. I feel, however, that the Wendigo is leaving us alone, letting us starve ourselves. Also waiting to see what will become of Kylie. After being curled up in the basement for most of the day, I suggested to check on Kylie to see how she was doing. Mike agreed. We both bundled ourselves with as many layers we could, using old dirty clothes we had found in some of the houses. Since we were already dirty from wearing the same clothing for the last 10 days, putting on some extra dirty clothes didn't matter. It was dark out. We wanted to take Kylie by surprise. She wouldn't expect us to come at night. We walked through the front door and into the snow outside. It hadn't snowed since day 5, so the snow in the front of this house heading to the other house was well packed down. Mike and I walked the short distance to other house. The weather tonight was colder than usual. If I had to take a guess, it was around minus 30 degrees Celsius. With the wind, however, it felt more like minus 40. When we entered the other house, we stopped and listened for any signs of growling or whimpering from downstairs. No sounds came, however. It was completely quiet save for the sound of our boots hitting the floor. We went to the stairs and looked down into the dark abyss below. The little light that came from the moon outside didn't penetrate through the blackness of the basement. Then the sound of stirring came from down below. It wasn't much at first. Then the stirring became a frantic thrashing. I called down to Kylie below and waited for an answer. Nothing came except for a low growl. I turned my head to look at Mike and noticed that he was already looking back at me. No words were needed to be said, so Mike descended the stairs first, followed closely by myself. As we slowly crept down the stairs, the floorboards creaked below our feet. The thrashing stopped, and in its place the growl's pitch became more pronounced, increasing in volume. We reached the bottom of the stairs and could see nothing. We stood there for 5 minutes, waiting for our eyes to adjust to the new darkness. The first thing I saw were Kylie's eyes. They seemed to glow in the dark, even though very little light reached down there. After I could make out its eyes, the rest came into view. Kylie, or whatever used to be Kylie, was in the middle of a transformation. Her body was becoming lanky, her muscles shriveling up into nothing. Her hair was also thinning and falling out. Her face was halfway between human and beast. Her teeth had fallen out, tiny fangs replaced them. What used to be her mouth was now elongating into a muzzle. Her fingernails had also started to grow, and her fingers growing longer. Those weren't the only things that were getting bigger. Kylie used to stand at 5 feet 4 inches tall. From what I could see of her now, she seemed to be around 6 feet. "Kylie, are you still there?" I asked. I saw her head tilt to the side, as if taking my words into consideration. Instead, she renewed her thrashing. When she wasn't able to get free, she lifted her newly formed muzzle into the air and let out a long, drawn-out howl. Mike and I had to cover our ears because it was so loud. After a minute of howling, it stopped. Then, off in the distance, another howl echoed through the night sky. It was even louder than she was. Then once again, the thing in front of us let out a howl again, joining in with its mother. I decided to turn tail and get the hell out of the house. Mike and I ran up the stairs and out of the house, back to the house we were staying at. Instead of going inside, however, we went to the back of the house and hid behind the foundation. We crouched down low and peeked our heads around the corner. Heavy footfalls of a large beast were coming down the street. It stopped at the house we had just been in and the one where our friend now resided in. The monstrosity brought his fist against the wall of the other house with enough force to demolish the entire front of the building. It then reached down and searched for something inside. We could see it stop moving, then move its arm back out of the hole. In its hand was the figure of our friend, cradled in its hand. The monster lifted her to its shoulder and placed Kylie there. The thing was cradling Kylie like a mother would cradle a baby. Once the Wendigo was satisfied, it turned around and faced in our direction, looking straight at us. Before we went back and hid behind the foundation once again, I could have sworn I saw a smile on its muzzle. We heard the giant start walking back in the direction it came from, its footfalls getting quieter and quieter as it did. I decided I had enough of the bullshit and got up and ran to the front of the house and after it. Mike protested and asked me what the hell I was doing, but I ignored him. The thing was pretty far at this point, but the thing was so tall that it was hard to miss it. When I got to a distance that I thought would be safe enough to follow it, I stopped behind a house every so often until it reached the other side of town and where the trees were, where we had looked for food a couple of days ago. The thing went between the trees, and I lost sight of it. By this point, I heard Mike come up from behind me. I told him what I had seen. He looked at me, then looked at the woods. January 22nd, 2018, day 11:12 a.m. I wanted to go in there right then and there, but Mike put a hand on my shoulder and told me it was too dark to be wandering around in the trees. Who knew? We may get lost in there, and then we would freeze to death. I looked at him and then back at the trees. As much as I wanted answers, I knew he was right. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into if we had just ran into the forest. Hesitantly, we turned around and headed back to our camping ground. When we got to the house we were staying in, I stopped and looked at the house where Kylie used to be. There was nothing but rubble left of the front of it. You could see right to the back of the house at this point. Mike and I stared at it for a minute before heading back into the basement we had been sleeping in. Just as we did, snowflakes started to fall once again, and so did the wind. January 22nd, 2018, day 11:08 a.m. We woke up this morning to quietness once again. Mike and I got ready for our excursion into the trees. When we got upstairs, we saw another few dozen centimeters of snow covering the ground. We groaned at the thought of having to travel through so much snow. We contemplated on waiting a few extra days to let some of the snow melt before attempting to follow the Wendigo, but Mike and I were getting weaker and weaker as the days went by. If we didn't do this now, there may not be another chance. I'm leaving this journal in this house, just in case we die searching for the Wendigo. I really hope I will make it back alive. This will be my last entry into the journal. A lot of stuff has happened in the last 20 days since I last wrote in here. As I write this, my hand shakes and my thoughts start becoming clouded. I am in a dank, dark cave. I can barely see anything, and it has taken my eyes a while to adjust enough for myself to write this down. In the corner across from me lies Mike. He is facing away from me and not moving a muscle. Ugh, I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where I left off 20 days ago. January 22nd, 2018, day 11:09 a.m. Mike and I waded through waist-high snow. Everything below our waists, no matter how hard we tried to keep our bodies covered, were now wet. It took us an hour to get to the edge of the town and to the trees. We stood at the edge, looking through them, second-guessing ourselves whether or not this was a good idea. Mike carried an axe that he had found in one of the houses, while I carried a sharpened pole. They probably wouldn't do much in terms of protecting us against the beasts, but it was more for a moral booster knowing that we had some protection against the Wendigos. I was the first one to step forward and make my way into the trees beyond. I heard Mike follow close behind me, close enough that I could feel his breath against my neck. Little did I know, but this would be the last time I would see Fort Kent. As we got further into the trees, the amount of snow reduced, making it easier for us to travel. We didn't really know where we were going, but there was a sort of trail leading through the trees. A lot of them were bowed away from the trail, and others were broken in half, done by something big. So we followed the trail until we saw the end of the tree line. When we got there, we stopped, and our mouths opened in awe. On the other side of the tree was a graveyard, with hundreds of tombstones. More than a normal town of this size should have. I figured it was because the entire town had died from smallpox all those years ago. This time Mike was the first one to take the lead. I followed close behind him. We slowly made our way through the tombstones. Mike, I realized, was heading towards a large building at the other edge of the cemetery. By the time we reached the building, the two of us were huffing and puffing from traveling through the heavy snow. After taking a short break, I started to make my way around the building looking for an entrance. I turned the corner to the back of the building and looked at a large hole in the side of a wall. I walked up to the entrance of the hole and peered inside. I just looked and didn't say anything. Mike did the same thing. Inside the building was a giant staircase leading to the depths below. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest now as fear started to course through my veins. My grip on the pole I was holding became so tight that my knuckles started to turn white. Mike and I looked at each other. I asked what we should do. He told me we should go down the stairs and see what was down there. I took a deep breath and took a step, then froze. Coming down from the hole bellowed a monstrous roar. Once the roar stopped, I heard howling. Not just from one Wendigo, but from at least a dozen or so voices. Sweat was now running down my brow as I listened to the howling of beasts. Then, all at once, the howling ceased. I waited a minute to see if they would continue again, but they didn't. I felt a hand touch my back, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned my head and saw it was Mike behind me. He brought his mouth down to mine, and we kissed. This brought renewed strength into my withering muscles. I held my hand out to Mike's and took his hand into mine. Together we walked forward down the steps and into the darkness below. Little did we know, after we would descend those steps, it would be the last time we saw the outside. At the bottom of the stairs, there was a shrine on the left wall, with candles burning everlasting. A pentagram hung above the shrine and on the floor as well. This wasn't what caught our attention. The far wall and most of the right wall was completely gone. Beyond lay a cavernous tunnel that descended into the depths of hell beyond. We hesitated, once again unsure of ourselves. I turned around, deciding I could not go through with this, when I let out a yelp of surprise. At the top of the steps stood another Wendigo. I flailed my hand, trying to grab Mike's shirt without looking away from the monster. I finally found purchase and grabbed a part of his shirt and tugged hard. He looked at me and turned around to see what had my attention. He froze once he saw the fully formed, 7-foot-tall Wendigo staring down at us. Before we could run, the Wendigo went down on all fours and leaped at me. Instinctively, I fell backwards. I still had the pole in my hand, so when I fell, the pointed end stayed pointed in the air. When the beast fell down, it impaled itself on the pole. The pole went through the entirety of the beast, finally resting on top of me. I thought that it was dead, then heard the thing howl out in pain and agony for a moment. It finally stopped howling, signaling its death. With the help of Mike, we pushed the Wendigo off of me. I grabbed his hand, and he helped pull me up onto my feet. That was when we heard more howling, coming from up the stairs. 3 more Wendigos came into view, all in different shapes and sizes. All 3 of them growled in unison. This time, I didn't wait for them to pounce on us. I grabbed him by the arm and led him to the entrance of the tunnels. In hindsight, it would have been better to try and fight those monsters instead of going into the tunnels. Once we entered them, we went through corridor after corridor, forks in the tunnel after forks. I'm unsure of how long we walked through the tunnels. They just seemed to go on and on. The only thing that I was able to keep time with and what day it was my watch. We walked through those tunnels for 5 days. When we stopped, one would always keep watch. One person slept while the other kept watch. Luckily for us, water seemed to seep through the walls, leaving puddles on the floor. They were infrequent, but enough to keep us going. We were so weak by this point that we had trouble standing. The thing is, we never saw another Wendigo after we entered the tunnels. We often heard the sound of howls, but could never determine how far away they were. On the 5th day, we saw a light at the end of a tunnel. If we could have ran, we would have. Instead, we dragged ourselves down the corridor. When we got close enough, we could see that the light was coming from a room. Before the room stood an open area that had a door at the end of it. All in all, it took us 2 hours to get into that room. When we crossed the threshold, we both collapsed to the ground, my bones protesting as I did. I looked around and saw that there was another exit to the room. It was a staircase that had been filled up with rocks and debris. I turned around, realizing that we had made a terrible mistake. It was then that I saw several Wendigos standing in the doorway. They didn't go past the threshold, but they didn't go away either. Mike didn't move, but I saw a stream of water going down the far wall. I crawled across the ground to the water and let out a sigh as I got there. I took several long gulps of water and felt as it went down into my stomach. I slowly pulled myself into a sitting position and looked over to see Mike go over to the other side of the room, where another stream of water ran down. We stayed there in that room, unable to move for 10 more days. It is said that a human body is not able to stay alive for more than 3 weeks. It has now been 3 weeks, and our bodies were withered into nothing. The entire time that we had been here, Wendigos had stayed in front of the door, waiting for us. At first I wondered what they waited for, but as I eyed Mike's withering body, I finally understood. I hadn't seen Mike move at all for the last 3 days, and I started to wonder if he was still alive. I flopped onto my stomach, placed my elbows on the ground, and painfully pulled myself along the ground. It took every ounce of strength to crawl over to him. On my way there, I grabbed a rock and dragged it along with me. I wheezed, trying to catch my breath, but every breath felt like I was breathing in glass. I reached up and grabbed Mike's shirt and pulled his body to the ground. I pulled Mike's shirt up and used all of my strength to lift the rock into the air. Just then I heard Mike let out a sound. I turned my head and saw his eyes half open. I didn't care by this point and brought the rock down onto his stomach, tearing through the flesh. He let out a weak sound, but after a minute his cries ceased as my head went into his stomach. I devoured his insides, my hunger making me into a ravenous animal. By the time I was done with him, his body was not recognizable anymore. I felt renewed energy coursing through my veins now, something I hadn't felt in weeks. I knew, however, that my fate was sealed. I crawled back to my corner and sat against the wall. A symphony of howls followed after I ate Mike, lasting well through the next few hours. Over the next couple of days, Wendigos brought me carcasses of animals, my human thoughts being overtaken by the need to eat. As I sit here writing these last words in my journal, I no longer look human, my body now almost fully formed into a Wendigo. It takes every ounce of effort to fight the animalistic thoughts going through my head. I howl just like the others, and my fight is almost over. The others brought me my journal yesterday, along with a pen. If you can read this at all, I am surprised I can barely read this myself. Thank you for taking the time to hear my story. I'm going to give in to the voices in my head now. March 12th, 2018. We interrupt your regularly scheduled program to bring you the update on the missing persons report on Mike Parrish, Kylie Johnson, Bobby Field, and Tara Williamson. Authorities have gone to Fort Kent in search of the missing teens, only to discover the remains of 2 badly damaged tents in Hyundai Tucson. Police searched the entire city, but found no sign of them. They have, however, found a journal and are now going through it. March 13th, 2018. Hello, my name is Michael Williamson, and I am the brother of Tara. I just got sent a series of photocopied pages from my sister's journal. I am currently going through it and translating it. As I have chunks of the translation done, I will post it to any and all social media sites. The police are trying to bury the story, but it's my job to get my sister's story out there. So please pass the story on to as many people as you can. The Wendigo legend is true. A blank screen cut to a man standing in an airport. He was surrounded by 3 other people. Bobby, hello everyone, and welcome to our documentary about the Wendigo of Fort Kent. We are in the Ottawa International Airport, about to board a flight to Elk Point Airport, Alberta. After pleading with my parents, they agreed to charter myself, Kylie, Mike, and Tara to the airport since no major airliner flew out that way. Tara, once we land, We will rent out an SUV and drive out to our destination. Once there, we will set up camp and drive around, seeing what, if anything, we will find there. Mike, we will search the town for any signs of a Wendigo that may have been there. If the stories are true, we will also look for the house where the urban legend of the Wendigo originated from. Kylie, once we gather any evidence that the legend of the Wendigo is true, we will come back to Ottawa and upload this film to YouTube. The screen went blank once again. When the screen came back on, the sound of a jet engine could be heard in the background. No Roots was playing in the background, and the camera panned around the airplane. Bobby, Kylie, and Mike were dancing around with bottles of Corona in their hands as they drank and partied the flight away. Mike turned towards the camera, then lifted up the bottle in his hand for a toast. Mike, what are you doing, Tara? Put down the camera and join the party. That is for the documentary. Tara, don't worry, Mike. I will put it away soon. Just give me a minute. Tara brought the camera into the bathroom. Tara, I don't know how to tell Mike this, but Tara took something out of her pocket. It was a pregnancy test with a positive sign on it. Tara, surprise Mike. I'm pregnant with your child. The screen went blank once again. The scene changed to a grocery store. Bobby was getting 2 cases of 24-pack of Coronas. Mike and Kylie were walking around the store getting junk food and canned food, and 2 cases of water as well. Tara, hey Mike, why don't you tell everyone where we are right now? Mike turned his head in my direction and smiled at me. Mike, we are in Bonneville, Alberta, about 45 minutes to half an hour away from Fort Kent. We are just stocking up on the essentials before making our way to the ghost town. I saw the cashier look up at Mike at the sound of the town we were going to. It was an old man, must have been in his 70s. He had gray hair and wrinkled skin. His voice was frail and shaky. Cashier, you folks are going to Fort Kent? You folks are crazy. No one has gone up in years. The last group to go up there never came back. Bobby, we know the story. It is part of the reason we are here. We are searching for the Wendigo. The old man said something that creeped the shit out of all of us. Cashier, you won't find the Wendigo. When the Wendigo wants to be seen, then the Wendigo will find you. After that, no more words were exchanged between us and the cashier. The screen went blank. January 12th, 2018, day 1. It was dark outside. Bobby had the camera this time and showed a party in full swing. Bobby, say hi to the camera, everyone. Tara, Kylie, and Mike all turned to the camera and waved. All 3 of them said, "Hello, world." Bobby, so we just arrived in Fort Kent a couple of hours ago and spent most of the day getting everything set up. As you can see, we are celebrating the start of our movie. Tomorrow you will get a grand tour of the city and the search will begin. For now, we have the night to drink the night away. The screen went blank. It cut to footfalls crunching in the snow. The camera panned right, and Kylie came into the picture. Kylie started to talk as Bobby and Kylie entered the first house. Kylie, so right now we are going from house to house, looking for any signs of recent occupancy. To give a little background on the story of the Wendigo of Fort Kent, it is said that a doctor's wife took ill with smallpox. The doctor locked himself and his wife inside of their house and disappeared for 3 days. Kylie and Bobby took one step into the first house and took a quick look around. Everything was covered in a heavy layer of dust, and everything seemed not to have been touched in a very long time. The 2 of them only spent 5 minutes in there before walking down the street to another house. Kylie, by the time the doctor's wife had gotten sick, most of the people in the town had died from smallpox. The legend says that the doctor ate his wife's body, and when he exited the house, he killed the rest of the townsfolk that were still alive, rendering the town into a ghost town. Kylie and Bobby walked into a few more houses, but found much of the same thing that they found in the first house. They were about to give up when they decided to go into one more house before waiting for Mike and Tara to show up. As soon as they walked into the house, they knew that this one was different from the others. The house seemed to have the lived-in feel. There also wasn't as much dust here as there was in the other houses. The main floor and first floor weren't very promising, so they decided to check the basement. The camera shook a little as they descended the stairs. Kylie let out an audible gasp as there was the writing covering the walls. Bobby just panned the camera from one end of the room to the other, making sure that he didn't miss anything. Just as they were about to wrap up, the sound of footsteps could be heard entering the house, and Tara and Mike came into view of the camera. They both were transfixed by the writing on the walls. After another couple of minutes of filming, the screen went blank. The next scene was back in Mike's and Tara's tent. Mike was at the tent flap and about to open it, when the sound of metal tearing to pieces filled the air. Bobby filmed the shadow on the tent. "Bobby, what is that thing? Is that the Wendigo?" Somebody shhh'd, and nothing more was said. The next thing that could be heard was the tearing of their tent. All in all, it took about 10 minutes from when the Wendigo first got to the campground to when it left. All of them let out a sigh of relief when it was gone. The screen went blank shortly afterward. January 13th, 2018. The next scene was of the church entrance. Bobby tried the front door, but it didn't budge. So he went around the church to the other side of the building. The sound of another set of footprints could be heard in the video, and Bobby stopped walking. "Bobby, hello? Is anyone out there? Tara, Kylie, is that you guys? If you guys are trying to scare me, it is working." Instead of the two girls coming out of hiding, a growl came from the distance. Bobby let out a scream and dropped the camera. He ran along the side of the building in view of the camera, when a dark, lanky shape entered the picture and jumped onto Bobby's back. Bobby let out a cry as the thing grabbed him in its jaws and started to drag Bobby away. The camera kept rolling, the battery lasting an impressive amount of time. Just as the battery sign started to flash of the bottom of the screen, the sound of screaming echoed through the night. The screaming came from the other side of the wall from the church. The camera kept rolling for another 10 minutes, recording the screaming before the battery finally died. The screen became static-y, and that was the end of the film. March 12th, 2018. I have just finished going through the video footage that I had just received via email. It was from the same anonymous person that sent me the photocopied journal pages. Everything that Tara had written in her journal coincided with what I had seen in the film. Just like the journal, this tape was going to be buried and hopefully never found by the public. Luckily for us, someone on the police force had the right sense to let this information be known. Second story. I think I encountered a Wendigo. My wife and I have been running the rat race for years, with a family, a house in the city, 2 dogs, a cat, the stereotypical American dream. But the city took its toll, the neighborhood got worse, the crime rose, and we found ourselves looking for a way out. Our opportunity came when I was offered a new job out of state. It was a great career move, but we didn't want to move to a new city just to have the same problems again. So we started looking around and found a great mountain community about an hour and a half from the job, and a great ranch-style house with a big back porch, windows everywhere, and a lot of property. The backyard has a big grassy area, and a creek that cuts the property in half, then acres of woods beyond. It's huge. The house is more than twice the size of our house in the city. It's all updated and has no neighbors within a mile. It's a radical change from the life we lived in the city, but best of all, it was less than half of what we were paying for our old house. The house was a foreclosure, and when we asked the listing agent about it, she simply said the old family had abandoned the property. We really didn't think anything of it. The first 3 months were uneventful, with us settling into our new life, the kids getting used to the new school and new friends, and most of all, us getting used to the big house and property. But then the weather turned cold, and things started to get weird on the property. It started with noises from the back property, things we chalked up to being in the woods. Then the motion lights around the house started going off randomly. Once again, we just chalked it up to being in the woods. But last night it all changed. Last night was the most terrifying night of my life. One of the dogs was at the back door whining and scratching. I assumed he needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked out the back door. Instantly, something fell off. The dog bolted for the back property, growling and snarling. It was a cold night, about 30 degrees, but the dog plunged straight into the creek and out the other bank, running off into the woods in the back of the property. Flashlight bouncing, I ran after him, calling his name. I got to the creek and made my way across the makeshift bridge, trying desperately to follow him. I could hear the dog still growling and barking from somewhere up ahead, and I pushed further away from the safety of the house and deeper into the woods. That's when I heard it, a shriek like I've never heard before in my life. It was a mix of a moaning wail and metal on metal. It echoed through the trees and froze me in my tracks. My dog bounded its way back to me and cowered down behind me. I turned around and could just make out the warm glow of the house behind me and the cold dark ahead of me. I swung my flashlight around wildly, looking for the source of the noise. And that's when I heard an even more terrifying noise. Out of the cold silence, my wife's voice floated all around me. "Babe," the voice called out. I whipped back around and could just barely make out the image of my wife, safely inside our house. The voice called out again. "Babe, I'm right here," came the voice from deeper into the woods. Then came another voice, just as clear as the other. It was my dad's voice. "Come out here," it called. I swung the flashlight around again, and this time caught the briefest glint of light bouncing off of eyes. The creature was in my beam of light for barely a second, but it was tall, maybe 6 feet, and ashen white. It had long, spindly fingers that grasped the trunk of a pine tree, and then it was gone. I turned back and ran towards the house. I ran headlong into the icy creek and stumbled. My dog ran past me, making it back to the yard and up to the porch. I dug my hands into the freezing, muddy bank and pulled myself out, not stopping to look back. When I reached the porch, I scrambled inside. My wife ran over to me, asking what had happened. I just shook my head. I'm not certain myself what happened. I had a growing sense of dread tonight as the sun began to fall. We kept the dogs inside, and I haven't dared to look out the back. But as I sit here typing, one by one, my motion lights in the backyard keep going on. Third story. Do Wendigo live in Sevierville, Tennessee. This just happened. I am a friend cabin with my boyfriend seeing our goddaughter. She was born back in March, but because of the pandemic, we have just been able to visit them. But that's beside the point. I was out back with their dog Jojo, a pit bull who is the sweetest dog I have ever met. And we were playing fetch, and about 30 minutes before I actually saw anything, I smelled rotten flesh. I didn't worry me too much because we are pretty up in the mountains, and I thought it maybe had been just a dead deer from way up on the hills, and the smell was just now getting to me. So I continued to play with Jojo, and once he was content chewing a stick, I sat down on a log and just enjoyed my music and the stars. I could still smell the rotting scent, but I just brushed it off. 5 minutes go by, and I get this really odd feeling of being watching, and Jojo ears perk up, and he looks around like he has had something. Now I did have my headphones on listening to some music, so I really didn't hear much. But I looked around to one of the trees and the white flash when I quickly got up and called Jojo to my side, and like the big coward, he has rushed to me, tail between his legs. We stood there for a second. The smell at this point was so strong, and I wanted to gag. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then it peeled at me from behind the tree. I only had to look at it for about 4 seconds before I ran away. It had to at least be 8 feet tall, skinny, and huge black eyes and kind of long blonde hair. I had never been so scared. I was about 20 or so feet from the porch, and I floored Jojo in tow. And we didn't look back. We got into the house, and I told everyone what happened. My boyfriend thinks I was just seeing things, and so do my friends. But they did say they had never seen Jojo so spooked. She is now hiding under my goddaughter crib. And I'm not joke as I am writing this. All of us just heard a scream of a man. We are the one in at least a 30-mile radius. Fourth story. My first encounter. I was young, maybe 9 to 11, and I was riding my dirt bike in northern Minnesota, Aitkin, Brainerd area, and I was helping my dad farm, but I was just riding up and down a short strip of the gravel road, and I was doing donuts, wheelies, etc. But over all the noise of that, and I heard my dad yell, but he was another 3 miles down the road and also combining, and something clicked to me, and I knew instantly what was happening. I was already interested in the lore and mythology of them, but I didn't think it. What happened to me, and I don't know how, but by the luck of my TTR 90, I rode as fast as I possibly could. I didn't think I was going to live because I seen it pacing beside me. I was obviously horrified, but I was close to a field that had one of my dad's trucks in it that he let me use to haul my dirt bike where I needed, and I can't even explain how horrid it looked. It had to be 8 to 10 feet tall maybe, and the fact it was running at 40 miles per hour and was still taunting me. I know it sounds like a nightmare, but I know what I seen, and then I finally lost it. I got in the truck, I abounded by dirt bike, and I just got out of there. I called my friend because I didn't think my dad would believe me. I drive as fast as I could, still shook, and I've only told 2 people, my friend, then eventually later I had told my dad. I thought he would think I was crazy until he told me he had an encounter when he was hunting when he was younger. If you want me to go into detail, I can tell that if you want. 5th story. Possible encounter with a Wendigo. So my boyfriend, girlfriend, and I are all pagan, and we live near the Great Lakes. My boyfriend and I decided to walk one of the trails despite it being winter. We were the only ones there except for a black truck that had been there for weeks, and we decided to walk the 3rd trail as it was the longest, went the deepest, and we figured we wouldn't be bothered by other people if they showed up. The tracks in the trail were all quite old, so it was clear no one had walked that trail in about a week at least. We have had spiritual encounters out there, but nothing bad. And it first started with like branches breaking and this weird chittering in the woods that I had heard first. My boyfriend didn't hear it, so I pushed it off to just being a squirrel, but my brain couldn't wrap itself around why a squirrel would be so close to the trail. After about another 10 minuets of walking, we were completely isolated out in the woods, and due to my asthma, which is extremely triggered by cold, caused us to stand there for a moment. We had both started noticing this foul smell of like rotting meat, but then I heard what sounded like mechanical clicking. It took a moment, and we stood there in silence until my boyfriend finally heard the clicking. I then decided we needed to start heading back as I had a very bad feeling about being there any longer. As we head back, we heard a noise that sounded like a child screaming from far away, with the mechanical clicking still close by. At this point, we decided to run, but shortly after I had to stop and breathe for a moment due to my asthma. We continued to hear the scream, and even though my sides and chest hurt, we continued walking until we got to the car. As we were leaving, we saw a gentleman getting his gear to go skiing, but he was the only one there except for the saw black truck that has been there for like a week. Was this an encounter with one, or do you think it could be something else? 6th story. I saw the Wendigo when I was 12. I was about 12 years old when I saw a creature I never expected to be biologically possible. Before I start recalling this horrifying memory, I have to explain what I think I saw by telling a description of something really similar to it. The Wendigo is a creature from Native American folklore, usually resembling either a human with pointed teeth and dried blood covering its body, or a humanoid animal-like spirit with a deer skull-like head. It feeds on humans due to it being a cannibal spirit. In 1659, there were reports of a humanoid creature with a skull-like head killing some of the people who originally founded America in the city of what is now New York. It eventually left, and what remained was an absolute bloodbath. The town I live in refuses to talk about this occurrence, and most have forgotten about it. But not me. Anyway, I'll get on with the story. I was walking home with my parents after a long day at the zoo. It was midwinter, so there was heavy snow all over the ground. I saw large footprints in the snow, shaped like those of a large bird. The only difference was the left toe was lifted off of the ground. I pointed this out to my parents, but they said it was probably just someone in a dinosaur costume having a prank. A snowstorm broke out 20 minutes after we set out, and I said to my parents, we should be moving, This could be dangerous. My parents agreed, and we took shelter in a subway. My dad eventually went out to see if it was safe. We heard a low, reptilian growl, then the sound of bones snapping. We ran further down the subway, got into the train, and jumped out at the next station, which was very near our house. We shut the door, locked it, and I went straight into my bedroom. I shut the door, and, just in case, I closed the blinds and barricaded the door. Only something supernaturally strong could push that, right? I was terribly wrong when I thought that. I heard the front door smashing open, and my mother screaming. Whatever just attacked my mom pushed my door open with ease. I then realized I had made a stupid mistake. I had only used light objects to barricade the door. The creature in front of me had armor on its head resembling a deer's skull, with a crack on its snout. Its yellow eyes with slit pupils stared at me, and I stared back. Its fur was stained with blood, and I saw it holding an arm I recognized as my own father's. The creature's gray figure began to move towards me. Without thinking, I grabbed a box and threw it at the creature. It fell backwards, and I realized I had the upper hand. I took the curtain rail off the wall and charged at the creature. I kicked a box onto its head, disorientating it temporarily. When it regained full control of its body, I had already thrust the rail into its underbelly. The creature growled in anger, but eventually went into what appeared to be a permanent state of unconsciousness. I ran downstairs to check my mom. I was relieved when she turned out to be okay. We both went upstairs to check the creature, but it had vanished. 7th story. The Bell in the Woods. Do not let the ancient bell buried deep within the woods frighten you. Save your fear for the creature that answers its call. My grandfather was a cruel man in every sense of the word. The only love he displayed was an unwavering infatuation with bourbon and abusive discipline. Being my only living relative, my childhood was bound to him and his farm by the constricting shackles of the law. His cruelty and frugal practices drove farmhands and hired help away as quickly as he could employ them. My place, however, was in the kitchen. Cooking and cleaning are the only skills a little girl needs to know. These were the words grandfather tattooed to my psyche. As I grew older, he began to stare at me in a way that no family member ever should. Glassy, bloodshot eyes peered through the keyhole whenever I bathed or dressed. I could only turn away and quietly pray to myself for him to stop. On the night he climbed into my bed, I ran, disappearing into the darkness of the woods. 3 days were all that I could bear. The pains of hunger eventually coerced my aching feet to shuffle back towards the farmhouse. As the dim light of dawn illuminated my defeated journey home, a dark object stuck out between the tall oak trees. I crept closer, bare feet crunching dry the leaves below. There it was, covered in decades of dirt, moss, and foliage, an ancient cast-iron bell. It was taller than I was, etched with unfamiliar symbols and words I had never seen before. Without hesitation, as if against my own will, I grabbed the bell's rusty wheel and pulled. I felt an obligation to hear it ring out, freeing the instrument from the stillness of time. The loud tones shook the ground below my feet. The birds ceased their morning chorus, and the wind haunted as the earth froze. When the tolling quieted, reality rushed in, and I continued my retreat back to the farm. The beating I received from grandfather after crawling through the front door was unforgettable. Dark bruises and scars painted my pale skin like ink on canvas. The following morning was a mental and physical struggle just to get up. My body was tender, and the ache served as both a harsh reminder of the past and a morbid glimpse into the future. I made grandfather his breakfast of bacon and eggs, doing my best to avoid eye contact as he was nursing his 3rd drink of the morning. When I made my way outside to begin my daily labors, 2 peculiarities took me by surprise. The first and less strange being that all of my chores were already finished. The second oddity was the gaunt man in a dusty suit standing completely still in the cornfield. I called for grandfather, and he stumbled from his recliner, drunk and annoyed. I pointed to the man in the field. Without saying a word, he made his way towards the man, and I followed behind, keeping my distance. Grandfather stopped a few feet from him. He was tall, taller than any man I had ever seen before. His long, bony limbs reminded me of crooked tree branches. His clothes were unusual, a charcoal-colored suit and matching hat. He reminded me of the men in the black and white films I fell asleep to at night. Grandfather called out to him and asked his business, but the man only smiled. His teeth were yellow and jagged. His eyes were beady and black. I never saw him blink despite the hot, summer sun beaming down on his face. Grandfather inquired once more, and he was met with the same smiling silence yet again. Infuriated, Grandfather threatened to shoot him if he did not leave his land. Hearing this, I spoke up and informed Grandfather of the stranger's generous labor. Grandfather gave the man a confused look, which was quickly replaced once again with annoyance. "I guess you were expecting payment for your work then? Is this your idea of an application?" Grandfather asked. The man shook his head no, the permanent smile still plastered to his wrinkled face. Grandfather continued, "Well then, what do you want, huh?" The man slowly rubbed his flat belly in a circular motion. Grandfather beamed. "Work for food? Now that's a deal I'll take any day. Come on back to my house, and the girl will whip you up something to eat." They strolled towards the house, and Grandfather commended him. As the man turned, I noticed a deep, grotesque scar on his neck, oozing green liquid. The lattice pattern made it look as though he had once been cut in two and then sewn back together. I shivered in fear. I prepared a lunch of sandwiches and potatoes for Grandfather and the mysterious guest. When I set the plates down, the man tore into the food like a starving animal. Within only a few seconds, he handed me the spotless plate. Amazed, I took it back and prepared another helping for him. Again, he ate it with ferocity. I looked at Grandfather and asked him what I was to do. He responded with the back of his hand and barked for me to make him more. And so I did. 8 servings later, the bizarre, lanky man was finally satiated. After lunch, the man quietly rose from the table, walked outside, and disappeared into the woods. I rummaged through the kitchen for any leftover scraps. The next morning, the man completed the chores before I awoke, and again, I made him a meal of tremendous proportions. This routine continued for months, cooking and cleaning for Grandfather and the gluttonous stranger. And still he never spoke. As time went on, our food diminished and my own hunger grew, both for food and freedom from the labor. On a cold, winter afternoon, our food finally ran out. The man had completed the daily chores and sat at the table ready to be served. I begged Grandfather for grocery money and promised to be back quickly. Infuriated, he blamed me for the missing food and struck me over and over again until I was too dizzy to see straight. I stumbled out of the kitchen and began to lose consciousness. Just before I did, I saw the tall man rise from the table in anger as Grandfather yelled to him. I said, "I ain't got no more food for ya." I awoke a few hours later to the smell of smoke, groggy and disoriented. I searched the house high and low, but Grandafter and the man were missing. I stepped outside into the crisp air. The smoky smell was stronger. I followed it like a hound until it led me to a clearing in the woods. There I discovered the source. The tall man looked up, smiling at me with his sharp teeth and inkwell eyes. He stood near a fire and rotated a spit, roasting a corpse in the flames. I sat in silence and watched the tall man eat every last morsel of meat from Grandfather's charred bones, just before slithering back into the ground, waiting for the dinner bell to ring once again. and I walked out of the woods, smiling, free for the first time in my life. Eighth story. The creature in the woods. The leaves crunched as I walked along the vast, beautiful forest. The blinding sun shined ever so brightly in the sky, setting ever so slowly over the horizon. A breezy wind blew through the forest, singing a quiet song in my ear as I continued to walk. I could hear the sound of animals scurrying through the forest, giving life to the terrain that Mother Nature ever so graciously built. As I navigated my way through the forest, I looked around at all the shady trees as I jumped over all the logs that lay on the ground. I imagined the life each tree has had, how many people throughout history had also walked the same path I was. Each tree has a story to be told, each as old as nature itself. I was a big thinker as a child, always asking my parents questions about how the world works. I was always in my head, wandering around worlds that I created. Worlds of cities built with bright diamonds. Fantasy lands where I was the hero of my own story. Nature was my escape from everything. I would imagine myself fighting the ferocious beast that I created in my head, or that I was on an adventure to Mordor like Frodo. This time, I imagined I was walking on the Death Trail in search of an ancient treasure buried by Blackbeard himself. I fought devilish beasts whose teeth could destroy a whole tree with a single bite, dragons whose eyes shined a crimson red and breathed fire as hot as the sun. The forest was my favorite place to think, for this inviting, evergreen forest was beautiful in every way. The sound of squirrels chattering could be heard as the birds sang their final song, for the sun was setting slowly over the horizon. Bright, vibrant colors filled the sky. The forest sparkled as sunlight cracked through the trees, lighting up the dirt path ahead of me, decorated with roots and flowers of many kinds. It was lively. The sound of scurrying could be heard on every side of me. The leaves and twigs crunched under my feet, and branches hung as if they were welcoming me. I breathed gracefully, my body feeling a slight chill as I walked through the path. I was deep inside my imagination when the sound of water took me out of my thoughts. I always hated that sound, for it meant that soon I would have to turn back. I continued my way, trying to ignore the sound, but it became increasingly harder as I reached the river. I slowed my pace, trying to prolong my journey back home. It wasn't long, though, until I saw the sparkling blue river in sight, the sound of crashing water filling my ears as I reached my endpoint. I stopped and cleaned off my arms and hands from the dirt that always found its way onto my body. I felt the water flow through my hands as I looked beyond the water into the tree line. I would always turn back at the river, for my fear of drowning kept me at bay. I would sometimes walk along the river, dipping my hands in the water as I walked. Something in me didn't feel fear of the water that day, though. I felt adventurous. I contemplated as I looked beyond the river stream. There was a whole other part of the forest beyond it, new lands to be discovered. I looked up at the sky. The sun was almost over the horizon. I thought about being out at night, thoughts of monsters and creatures capturing me. I remembered my stories, though, the heroes who saved the world from danger. Suddenly, without a second thought, it was like my body just got up and began to jump on the rocks in the river. I felt the water on my feet as I stopped on each rock before jumping to the next. Once I reached the other side, I quickly ran into the forest beyond the water. I walked along the ground as I studied the trees to get a good idea of my surroundings to find my way back. I made landmarks on trees out of chalk I always carry with me, so I wouldn't get lost, something I've always done when traveling new terrain. Something about this area felt off, though. It was as if Mother Nature had left, leaving her creation in ruins. It was a lot darker than I thought it would be. There were so many trees that it blocked out most of the sunlight. I was a fearless child, though. I thought that I could not be harmed, for nature was my dearest friend. I was wrong, though, for no one is safe from the brutality of Mother Nature, including me. As I walked through the forest, I looked ahead to get a good mapping of my terrain. Shadows gathered around the forest as the dark trees hung over me like limbs from the ancient world. There was an ominous silence that filled the forest. No sound of animals running around, no crickets or frogs chirping, no wind twirling in my ears, just pure and utter silence. The only thing I could hear was the sound of leaves crunching under my feet as I walked. I noticed a tree that looked like a hideous witch, its gnarled limbs and black claws stretching over me, almost serving as a warning to not go any farther. This was a tree that had died many years ago from the looks of it, succumbing to nature's life cycle. I stared at it for a minute, feeling an uneasiness that crawled down my back. I continued my journey across the uncharted forest, but the tree stayed embedded in my mind. There was a feeling of dread that I fought off as my heart felt uneasy. The forest seemed dead, as if it was abandoned long ago. Stumps were scattered across the forest grounds, and clumps of bushes lay among the stumps. Twigs snapped from my feet, and brown trees were very close to each other, which formed a very thick canopy. It was barely bright enough for me to see ahead of me, yet I did not stop. There was a mixture of feelings that I felt that I cannot describe. One thing was for sure, though, I felt as if I was being watched. It was like the trees had eyes of their own and were watching me very closely. My senses widen. My skin tingles. I breathe deeply and listen with great intensity. My instincts were telling me that something was off, a great deep feeling that crept over me like a beast. I kept looking behind me to make sure nothing was following me, scanning my surroundings with great efficiency. That's when something caught my eye. Straight ahead, deep in the forest, barely in eyesight, stood a tall, dark black figure that peered at me from behind a tree. I was paralyzed in shock, gripped by a sudden strong urge of fear that froze my entire body as I stared at whatever was ahead of me. I couldn't make out any features. It was so dark that I couldn't see the mysterious figure clearly. I felt our eyes lock, even though I could not see its eyes. It felt like it was staring through my very soul. I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind, but everything in me told me otherwise. It just stood there, staring at me. My body couldn't move. I tried, but it was like my brain just shut off. As I looked at this creature, everything about it just did not seem right. Its arms were so long that one touched the ground, the other wrapped around the tree. Its head had a weird shape to it, as if it was stretched out. The creature stood incredibly tall. It had to be at least 9 feet. It was skinny, as if it was just pure bones and nothing else. It did not feel like an animal. It felt like two intelligent beings staring at each other. Somehow it felt even quieter than it had before. Silence crept down my whole body, paralyzing me. Everyone has a fight or flight, but in some instances when a human reaches a new level of fear they never felt before, they freeze. You try to move, but it's like you are being gripped by an invincible force. Every instinct in you tells you to run, yet you can't. Even though I've fought many monsters and beasts in my head, when faced with a real danger, I did not fight. All I felt was fear of the unknown certainty of death. A cold chill filled the air. Even with no wind, it got colder. My body violently shook, legs trembling with pure dread and fear. I felt the thing looking me up and down, as if it was studying me. Neither of us made a single movement, as if it too was paralyzed. Sweat dripped down my face. I breathed heavily as a panic attack began to emerge out from the darkest pits of hell, dragging me down with it to devour me. Suddenly, the creature quickly disappeared behind the tree. The sudden movement caused my brain to snap out of the paralysis, and my legs started moving. It was like my primal instincts kicked in, instincts given to us from our primal ancestors. My mind was racing with thoughts as I wondered what it was I just saw. I was trying to convince myself that it was just an animal, but everything in me told me that something was not right. I could hear my own heartbeat as it tried to claw its way out of my chest. Keep going straight. Soon you should see a long tree that has vines wrapped around it. Once reached, turn right, and you should see a tree with white chalk. Keep running forward until you see the stump you almost fell over. Make another right, and keep going forward. I thought to myself, mapping out the forest Indiana in my head. My skills of navigation have never helped me before like this. I was running and thinking at such a speed that I was hurting both my head and legs. I started to smell a foul stench that smelt like a rotten old corpse. It filled the forest, and I nearly gagged once it poured down my nose. A clicking noise surrounded me, fast and animalistic. I started to hear something in the forest running behind me. Footsteps sounded heavy and fast. I looked back for a second to see if I could see whatever was chasing me, but all I could see was the dark, open forest. I looked back and continued my way back to the river. I weaved my way through the forest quickly, making sharp left and right turns to find my way back to safety. My legs felt like they were going to break, and my heart was hammering at my chest as my lungs were set ablaze. I listened to the sound of running behind me. The clicking was even closer and louder than before, the smell even more strong and foul. It too knew how to navigate a forest as I did, maybe even better. My skin felt cold as I shook to the point where I almost fell many times. I always caught myself, though. Make a sharp right turn once you reach the dead tree. Once you see the rock that stands tall, make a left and keep running straight. It was like my mind was on adrenaline too, thinking at such a pace that I never thought I could think before. The running behind me sounded even closer, the stench even stronger. My legs felt as if they were going to break, yet my speed still stayed the same as I used every ounce of energy I had. A familiar sound filled my ears, a sound I have always hated and despised. It was the river. I was close. I ignored the pain I felt in my legs and continued to run as whatever was behind me was catching up. My heart was beating like a war drum. I was running off of pure adrenaline at this point. My chest felt as if someone was squeezing my internal organs together, my feet burning from the many blisters I had. I ignored it all, though, and continued to guide myself through the cruelty of Mother Nature. I began to see the river stream. I was approaching it rapidly. My legs felt numb. My lungs were on fire as I breathed heavily out of exhaustion and fear. It sounded like it was only a few feet behind me. I knew that if I didn't reach the river, then it would soon catch up to me. The clicking sound was basically right in my ear. The stench was so strong I had gagged. I used every ounce of energy. I had to run even quicker, ignoring all the pain I felt in my body. I hurtled out of the forest once I reached the river and jumped my way across the rocks that stuck out, falling onto my knees once I reached the other side. I quickly got back up and began running again. I didn't stop running until my body collapsed. Not being able to move, I hadn't noticed that it had turned to night. A dark umbra surrounded the forest. I was too exhausted to move. Every breath struck my chest deep. Yet, there was no sign of anything chasing me or the foul smell. The sound of wind and nature filled my ears again, replacing the terrifying clicking noise. Tears began to slowly drip down my face, mixing in with my sweat. I opened my mouth to let out a whimper that never came, too exhausted to even make a sound. I wanted to go home, back to where my mother was. I started to breathe even heavier, my heart beating so fast that it was like I was having a heart attack. Everything became fuzzy and blurry, my mind racing with thoughts that only made me panic worse. I shook rapidly. I felt gripped by a sudden force that squeezed my body tight. My chest pounded in pain. It felt as if everything was being smashed by a hammer. I felt an impending doom dragging me down deep into the darkness. deeper and deeper into the pit of despair. I tried to catch my breath, but it was too much for me. I thought that whatever chased me would find me and devour my very soul. Everything was so loud. It was like I was trapped in a tornado. I felt like I was going to throw up from the dizziness I felt. My muscles were tensed. The world was spinning around me as my heart started to pound worse than it ever had before. The pain from my chest slowly spread to my shoulders, giving a sharp pain in both shoulders. I got chills all around my body, gripped in fear and anxiety that had its hold on me and would not let go. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was going to die a gruesome and horrifying death. I looked at the night sky as I was in the hands of death and noticed how beautiful it looked. The pale crescent moon shone like a silver claw in the night sky. I looked upon the vast sea of stars, shining so brightly like little diamonds in the sky. Everything slowly went quiet. It was like the earth stopped. I felt the summer green grass on my hands and looked at the trees that surrounded me. Fireflies filled the darkness, sparkling like precious, valuable stars in the darkness. The sound of crickets could be heard all around, chirping their song in replacement for the birds singing. My heart slowly started beating a steady rhythm, and my breathing slowed to a smooth pace. I breathed in to smell the woodsy fragrance, letting go of all my worries. It was as if Mother Nature cradled me in her arms and reassured me that everything will be all right. I felt a moment of tranquility, my mind silenced. I lay on the earth, admiring the beauty of the world around me. I slowly stood myself up, ignoring the pain I felt in my legs and chest. I welcomed back the blossoming, fragrant forest as I walked slowly through Mother Nature's creation. I began my walk home, admiring every inch of nature that surrounded me. I always imagined beautiful lands in my head, landscapes of fantasy filled with bright colors. I never realized that I was already in a dazzling world filled with many mysteries to be discovered. The forest was breathtaking tonight, sparkling in the moonlight like little crystals. I wasn't in my head on the walk home. My mind was silent. Brown trees stood tall, and flowers bloomed, engulfing the forest Indiana a smell so luscious and fresh. I thanked Mother Nature that night, for she taught me a lesson that I will never forget. I am not invincible. I am no hero or great warrior. I am just a child. Not every story needs a hero, and I do not have to be the hero in every story. I walked my way home, embracing the forest for the first time ever. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.